The following is perhaps more than anything else indicative of the power of the internet. Because how else would a person who obviously knows not of what he speaks get such public attention? And in fact, the interviewer will not say that exactly, but point out the fact that this guy's getting on to be interviewed, and that's just part of the PR machine. Well, this Satanist at least admits that, the way I will put it, is they're not really interested in getting their message out for its own sake. They are doing what they're doing as Christianity busting. They just want to shut down Christianity, and they do it by pretending to be interested in equal time. So that's definitely a lesson they have learned from activist atheists. And this particular group, the Satanic Temple, claims to be atheists. And so that's what they do. They're not really interested in having their say, but only in as far as it'll get them to shut down Christianity. So in other words, they want to push themselves into public schools, in this case, hoping that they will be denied, and that in turn will lead to all the Christian groups being denied access. That's the goal. Now, interestingly, this group plays the PR game that we're Satanists, but we don't believe in Satan. We're Satanists, but we're atheists. And one would wonder if somewhere within the core ethic of their group there is some requirement to tell the truth. But anyhow, let's say we take their word for it. Well, he says they view Satan as a certain symbol and appeal to the Bible for the claim that Satan encouraged Adam and Eve to think for themselves, and that was considered a sin. Well, of course, there are times where thinking for yourself is a very, very bad idea. For instance, when I let my kids go outside to play, you bet that I laid down the rules. It only makes sense. But then he says, well, we don't get our understanding of Satan from the Bible. So apparently, in those bits and pieces that they want to appeal to, they'll take the idea of Satan from the Bible, and then in the other more unpleasant bits and pieces, they won't. So it's obviously a pick and choose cafeteria style hodgepodge of beliefs. And now he says, for example, that the reason they call themselves atheists, Satanists, and not a group of atheists or skeptics or freethinkers or people interested in science, etc., is because they want to deal with the issue of, well, Christian freedom, really, on a theological basis. Okay, but then you claim that you're atheists. So, I mean, this poor guy just is obviously so clueless. He has no idea what he's talking about because he keeps on making category mistakes. Or rather, he's jumping from category to category to category and somehow thinking that he can just tie them all together. And it just fails. I mean, when you listen to him, it fails because he's not making any cogent sense, laying out his claim with a beginning, middle, and end. He's just all over the place. And at least their end goal is stated very honestly. They're only interested in shutting down Christianity. And interestingly enough, he attempts to qualify this statement by saying, no, not Christianity in and of itself, but only the proselytizing groups. Well, guess what? There is no Christianity without proselytizing. That's one of the commandments of Christianity. And so that's something with which to deal. Christianity is in part based on the concept of spreading the news, spreading the gospel, spreading the good news. So don't pretend that you're only taking aim at a certain portion or group of Christianity when obviously you are not. Although I would imagine he's not pretending. Most likely he's actually that clueless. So you will note that he's complaining about Christianity in the school versus their social justice and all their supposed goals. Well, just take social justice, etc., as a sort of PR term for liberalism, right? For leftist, sociopolitical messages to the kids. But now let's go back to when Christianity actually was a driving force in schools, right? For instance, back when schools displayed 10 Commandments and such things. Well, the biggest problems in school at that time was running in the hallway and chewing gum in class. Okay, now we finally got rid of those pesky Christians and their 10 Commandments and Judeo-Christian influences in school as a whole. And what do we have now? Well, we have sex, drugs, and violence. And so the goal of these Satanists is to further kick Christianity out of the schools, have the kids question what is right and what is wrong, and guess what they're going to be doing? Sex, drugs, and violence.
I'm Dave Miller. This is Think Out Loud. A new after-school program could be coming to the Parkrose School District in East Portland, joining the Boys and Girls Club and the Good News Club, which is run by an evangelical organization. It's part of a nationwide effort by a group called the Satanic Temple to counter what they see as Christian messaging that's damaging to kids. Finn Rez is behind the effort at Parkrose. He is the co-head of the Portland chapter of the Satanic Temple, and he joins me now in the studio. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Why do you want to create a Satanist club at Parkrose?
Well, the club is really in response specifically to the Good News Club, which is run by the Children's Evangelical Foundation. And it's really to counter the message of that particular club, which has been problematic and raised a lot of concerns for parents. Not so much particularly because it's just Christian, but because it's espousing a particular set of fundamentalist perspectives that we feel are really pretty inappropriate for children of that age group.
What in particular?
So the overall goal of the Good News Club is not just to teach kids about ideas of Christianity, but particularly to proselytize, which is a misconception a lot of people aren't aware of. One of the main ideas that they really try to indoctrinate children with is the idea of inherent sinfulness and hellfire as well. So, if we were talking about an adult audience, it would be a completely different thing. But we're talking about very young children who, in a lot of cases, don't even know how to read yet, and they're being taught that they are inherently sinful, and that if they don't live their lives in a very conscripted and constrained kind of prescribed way, that they're going to be condemned.
So that's your take on what the Good News Clubs are teaching around the country, including in the Portland area. So what would somebody learn at an after-school Satan Club meeting?
So in contrast, our club is, our overall message is, instead of teaching kids that they are sinful, we want to teach kids to think critically, to be able to believe in themselves, and to learn about the world on more empirical terms. The world's a very diverse place, and who knows what children will grow up to be, but we want them to be able to be free to explore themselves, accept themselves and other people for who they are. Benevolence and empathy is a really core part of our own values, so we're trying to offer that in contrast.
Where does Satan fit into everything you just described?
So Satan for us is an allegory, and it's a lot different than what maybe with the traditional Christian perception of Satan is. Satan for us is a symbol of rebellion against arbitrary authority, the right to question ideas that don't stand up to truth. So, another name for Satan traditionally that people are familiar with is Lucifer, and Lucifer literally is a bringer of light. And we find it kind of appropriate but ironic. We don't base our interpretation of Satan per se off of the biblical account. But if you go back to the biblical account in Genesis, the first thing that Satan did, the first sin that was committed by Adam and Eve is where Satan encouraged them to think for themselves. And for us, that's pretty telling. We think everybody should think for themselves. Everything should be questioned.
So, are you talking about Satanism in general, or just your version of it? Is there no theistic version of Satan in which Satan is closer to a Christian conception of, of Lucifer?
There is, yeah. So Satanism, just like Christianity, is a spectrum of different beliefs, and there's definitely different groups. There are theistic Satanists. The Satanic Temple as an organization is non-theistic, so we don't believe in a literal Satan any more than we believe in a literal God. And that's raised some questions for some people who are a little bit skeptical and who feel that maybe our approach is just being a little bit cynical as atheists and trying to brand it as Satanism so that we can insert ourselves into the conversation.
So you can get onto radio shows.
Yeah, exactly, But
what's your response to that charge?
Well, I would say there's a lot of religions in the world. And if you're Christian, Jesus Christ or Jehovah or whatever name for God that you may have is a real personality to you, in the same way that if you're Muslim, the Allah is real. So there's questions over which God is real, and if really the actual existence of a God is really what makes it important, or is it the belief in the concepts that God enshrines? We don't believe in Satan as a literal being, but we do believe as an icon and as an emblem, he enshrines ideas that we use to encode our own beliefs, much like Christians use Jesus Christ, to enshrine a lot of their ideas.
What is it, though, about Satan that makes him a good? If for your branch of Satanism, you've removed the theistic components, and in fact, as you said, that's one of the biggest aspects of your group is to fight against theism, a particular kind of theism. What is it about Satan as a symbol that is so attractive? I mean, you could choose, other bugaboos for fundamentalist Christians. You could choose Darwin. You could choose, Richard Dawkins now.
Right.
You could choose the flying spaghetti monster. Instead, you chose a very particular one.
We did, and the reason for that is because of the context of the conversation. A popular question we get is, why didn't you just call yourself the after-school atheist club or the after-school science club? And the reason why we take the approach that we do and we embrace that symbol of Satan for our own is because the discussion that we're having currently is about theology and theological mythology. And, in order to be having that conversation, we need to be coming at it from the same approach. If we were to go with after-school atheists or just call ourselves atheists or secularists or humanists or whatever, pejorative term you want to use.
Or descriptive term.
Descriptive term, yeah, is actually the right word for that. It simply, in this conversation, wouldn't have the same effect.
Do you put yourself in those categories? Do you call yourself a secularist or a humanist or an atheist?
Absolutely. I'm all of those things.
And a Satanist.
Yeah, absolutely. And our values are very secularist, very humanist. For people who are familiar with a lot of the concepts that were behind the Enlightenment, we draw very heavily from that, as well as from a lot of traditional satanic mythology and things like that. We pull from a lot of different traditions. But, I don't think any one person is ever just one thing at a time.
That's what Walt Whitman said. If you're just tuning in, I'm talking with Finn Rez. I should say it's a pseudonym. He is the co-head of the Portland chapter of the Satanic Temple. We'll get to the reason for the pseudonym in just a bit. But first, I want to play a little bit of audio from a YouTube ad that the national organization that you're a part of put out just a few months ago for these clubs. This is the music that accompanies some spooky images of mannequins and spiders and kids walking backwards in slow motion off a school bus. So as I mentioned, this music goes on for a little while. It is a spooky ad with sort of sepia tone, slow motion things. I can't make out all of them, but there are definitely some creepy crawly things and some mannequins shot from weird angles, and then slow motion pictures of kids getting off school buses or walking through the fields. What's the idea of an ad like this?
I don't know. I think it's pretty catchy. I've had it on my running playlist for the last week or so. But the idea, it admittedly, for most people, it is creepy. I remember the first couple times I viewed it, and I had to step back and think about what our angle was in presenting it this way. And really the subtext rhetorically of the promotional video is that we want people to question the accepted concepts of what is good and what is bad. One of the things with us taking on the moniker of Satanism is here we are promoting ideas of social justice, equality, benevolence, empathy, yet we're supposed to be the bad guys. We're Satanists. And we're fighting against a system. I don't want to characterize all Christianity as being this way, because this isn't a broad attack on Christianity, but particularly with the Children's Evangelical Foundation and what they've done, which hopefully we can talk about a bit more. They're supposed to be the good guys, and yet they're bringing ideas into our school and for very specific strategic reasons are targeting very, very young children. And the video is very, very ambiguous about, well, what's the good and what's the bad here. We used a lot of imagery, of course, of school children and things that are very, very familiar to people, but we sort of spun it, turned it on its head, and put it into a context of, there's a darker side to what's going on with a lot of these clubs, and that's what we're hoping to address.
I should say that we did talk about these clubs with the organization that puts them on 2 years ago. We've tweeted out a link to that conversation from 2 years ago. If you want to join this conversation right now about the possibility of a new after-school Satan club at Park Rose Elementary School, at elementary school in the Park Rose District, you can give us a call. Our number is 1-888-665-5865. Let's get to how you became a Satanist. I mean, were you a Satanist when you were born?
I was not. No, I actually was raised fundamentalist Christian, and was for most of my life up until really just the last couple of years. I was raised Jehovah's Witness, so that's for me been kind of a 180-degree turn, and it's been a very personal kind of a journey and path for me. I think the advantage, in my position, it gives me, it as far as working with the situation we are right now. I'm able to empathize, as many in our group are able to empathize with where the other side is coming from. And again, it's not an attack on Christianity. I myself remember, how it felt to have those beliefs, and I can still empathize with them.
What did you think of Satan, the concept of Satan when you were a kid?
Satan when I was a kid was terrifying. Of course, like many subgroups of Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses believe in Satan as a literal being. So I learned to judge the world, the bad things that were happening in the world, as being the work of a supernatural entity. Good things were ascribed to God, particularly within our organization, but we characterized all the evil in the world as being the work of a literal demon. That, for me, as I've gotten older and I've moved away from my faith and I step back and look at things more critically, and you realize the world's got good and it's got bad. It doesn't need to be explained by any sort of supernatural force.
It seems like, you're specifically trying to counteract what you were inculcated in with, when you were growing up. How do you think that affected you? You don't want young people today to be taught what you were taught. How did it affect you?
First, I would say it's not so much that I'm opposed to people learning about Christianity or those ideas. It's more the age than anything. Very young children, there's a lot of cognitive development that hasn't happened yet. They're just learning their ABCs and should be at a point where they're able to explore things without having that kind of really guilt trip laid on them. If we were talking about adults or even high schoolers, it'd be a very different conversation. But how it's affected me, as a person, it has been very, very personal. I still, even though I'm an atheist at this point, I still work to sort of unpack and process a lot of the indoctrination I grew up with. And I work hard not to have grudges or hard feelings about that. It wasn't all a negative experience. But I'm very cognizant of how and very aware of how being brought up with that line of thinking really impaired my ability to think critically later on in life and created personally for me, a lot of problems.
When do you think that changed for you?
It started changing for me probably around high school. I mean, the journey for me was probably about a 20-year one. I had my struggles with my faith for quite a long time and was in and out of my congregation a couple of times before I finally left it willingly a couple of years back or so. I sort of faded out for a while. You know, there was those seeds of doubt early on, and I got to a point where I was finally willing to look at outside perspectives, which is one of the things that we're not really encouraged to do. And when I started looking at evidence and I started looking at other types of philosophy, other types of religions, and where other people are coming from, I realized that my belief system I was raised with, it wasn't any better or any worse. It was just another way of looking at things.
Why have you decided to use a pseudonym?
For me, of course, I have my professional life, and not everybody is understanding of what I'm doing. There is controversy with the work that we do as the Satanic Temple. So part of that, protects my professional life. Part of it is, even though I don't have contact with my family anymore that are Jehovah's Witnesses, I still respect their feelings. I think emotionally for them, it would be a very hard thing to process. What I'm doing in my life currently.
So you right now have no contact with the members of your family who are Jehovah's Witnesses?
I don't.
And they don't know that you are a Satanist?
They don't know.
What do you think it would mean to them?
I think for them coming where they're coming from, it would be traumatizing. And I understand that. I have empathy for that. Again, for them, Satan is a literal being. So, for me at this point, not only have I taken a position of apostasy against the religion I came from, but I've gone one step further and, for lack of a better term, I've joined the dark side.
What do you think would be more troubling to them? The fact that you call yourself a Satanist, or you don't even have the same concept or their idea perhaps of what a Satanist is not your idea of what you are?
I think really, from my experience as a witness, once you're outside of that group and that organization, it's really all pretty much the same. If there's, that's one thing that's kind of particular to their belief system is you're either a witness or you're not. And so when you leave that, it's all kind of the same.
James has called in from Portland. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just really appreciate pretty much everything your guest has said so far. I'm a parent of 2 young children in the Portland school system, and if your club has any plans to open up at the Richmond school, I'd love to sign my kids up. I think everything you're saying is really terrific. And I think a lot of the kind of horrific imagery, I appreciate it from a sort of aesthetic sense in terms of the commercial that you were playing. But I think there's a point to it, and part of the point, at least for me, is that there's a lot of horrific stuff in Christianity and in most of the mainstream religions, but no one ever really thinks to question it. It's just sort of taken as a given, and by sort of highlighting the satanic aspects of the club, I think it's forcing people to take a look at religion in general, in maybe a way they're not used to.
James, did you grow up in any organized religion?
No. My parents were atheists, and they raised me as an atheist. So I did not. I experienced some slight forms of discrimination as a kid as an atheist. I remember telling one of my best friends that I didn't believe in God, and that was pretty much the end of our friendship because he'd been taught that if you didn't believe in the Christian God, then you were evil.
James, thanks very much for that call. Finn Rez, it does make me wonder how the response you might get would be different if we weren't in Portland. Have you thought about that?
A lot. To be honest, we're lucky to be in Portland, and to be clear, we are meeting some obstacles. We get a lot of supportive emails from the community. We've had parents from the Park Rose School District and Sacramento Elementary that have been very supportive of us. The district, while they've been overall, I would characterize it as professional. There's been There's been a little bit of a resistance, and it's understandable. I don't begrudge them; they don't want us there, and I don't hold that against them. We're having to kind of work through some obstacles there, but we have chapters all over the country nationally doing this. Even in Seattle, they're working on one. LA is working on one, but there are some of our chapters, like Arizona, in particular, I think is going through some potential legal difficulties, where the rules as they're written, the laws, as far as how these types of groups were supposed to be treated, are just being completely disregarded because people, it's inconvenient for them to have to follow them in this instance.
Do you think this club is actually going to be up and running in Parkrose this school year?
I think so. Yeah, I'm still pretty optimistic. We've got some things we got to work through with the district, and as far as setting expectations, clarifying policies, and giving them a chance to get to know us a little bit. But yeah, I think that there's a good chance that we'll be up running. We're hoping in the next couple of months, maybe even by the end of October, just depending on how things go.
Finrez, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
I took a shower with Satan.
Well, my wife is a transsexual Satan worshiper.
I took a shower with Satan.
Well, my wife is a transsexual Satan worshiper.
I'm a little concerned right now about your salvation and stuff.